that we can benefit from everything that you have to say to us, and that we can benefit from the learning space that I know you're going to open up to us. So Professor Colleen McLaughlin, very warm welcome. Professor Colleen is Director of Innovation at Cambridge University, and she's a full Professor of Education. I hope she doesn't mind me saying that she was a very formative influence in the academic community at the Faculty of Education when I was growing as a researcher. Colleen was involved in many conversations that attracted my interest. Not only was she an important influence on my thinking as part of a very powerful Cambridge tradition in practitioner research and school-university partnerships, Colleen is a very warm and fabulous colleague to have. And we're all colleagues here. And Colleen is joining us as a global authority, but she's also joining us as a colleague. So my apology earlier wasn't for any of those remarks. My apology in advance was about these remarks. Colleen has a wide, supple and flexible range of research and academic interests. You could sum Colleen up as a walking Faculty of Education. Her interests embrace educational reform and development, a massive field in and of itself, culture, politics, and global justice. Alongside that, she has a developed profile and interest in care in education, counselling, psychology, psychotherapy, and well-being. She is an international and global authority on teacher action and practitioner research. Her interest also embraces personal, social, and emotional development and education. Hers, Colleen's, is a profile of huge breadth and huge depth through the richness of her networks and collaborations. We're delighted here at ECAE because we take partnerships seriously. We develop programs as one of the dynamics for policy and practice development in the field of education. But we also are very keen to further expand our partnerships, especially with schools, because we want our research, we want our programs to be practically relevant to schools and to teachers who work with them. So this question about school-university partnerships to foster school improvement.
Professor David, you got muted.
You are muted, please.
Oh. Am I muted now?
No.
I'm not muted now. Yes, so these questions of school-university partnerships for fostering school improvement, embedding inquiry and research in teacher learning cultures of improvement are really important and really difficult and really knotty and not at all straightforward. So for those reasons, partnership is a contested issue. You know, there are conflicts about how universities and schools think and work and how they can work and think together in partnership. None of that's straightforward, and we need guidance. There are opportunities, however, that arise when the distinctive expertise, to use a phrase coined by Donald McIntyre, who has been influential for both Colleen, herself an influence, and myself, Opportunities arise when you bring the distinctive expertise of school colleagues and university colleagues together. But how to bridge schools and universities together in a cohesive, fruitful partnership. We're so interested to hear, Colleen, the things that you have to share with us. And I'm going to hand the floor over completely to you. Thank you so much. It's very lovely to see you.
It's very lovely to see you, I have to say. And my profound apologies for my late arrival. You'd think I'd learned to check time schedules, but we moved times about 2 weeks ago, and I didn't think through the consequences of that, so I apologize. I will try to give you an interesting hour and a half. So I think Dave's comments are absolutely spot on, because it is, in fact, it's a difficult area, and it requires a combination, I think, of capacities from the people who are developing it. What I'm going to try to do today is to show you first, in this first section, how the purposes have evolved, and then to come to the more practical aspects, because I'm still running partnerships, and I'll talk about two right at the end. I think it is extremely difficult work, it's hard work, but it is also extraordinarily rewarding. And I think Dave is right. School and university partnerships are particularly powerful. So the other thing I hope to bring to the table, and this is where Dave's reference to Donald McIntyre is very important. The first partnership that we established at the Faculty of Education was a partnership called SUPER, School University Partnership for Educational Research. And it had a particular feature that I hope you'll benefit from today, which was Donald's commitment that we should research what we were doing constantly. And I have to say that has stayed with me in all my practice ever since. So what I hope to be bringing is, you'll see there is a huge amount of advocacy in this area, but the research on the reality of it is somewhat different, and it obviously makes it more complex. So I've sent my presentation to colleagues at, to Joseph and colleagues. So if you want a copy of this, you know, I'm sure you'll be able to get it later if you haven't already got it. So I'm going to share my presentation, she said, hopefully. Does appear to be doing something, I promise. There it is. This first section is going to be about, I want to try and show you how there's been an evolution of purposes, which of course is what knowledge is supposed to do. But it's made it very, very complex. And it means that these meanings and purposes have become layered on top of each other and make the field much more complicated. So this, in a sense, is what I've put up here, is a historical map, if you like. And I'm going to start over here on the right, because this man, Lawrence Stenhouse, he's been a seminal influence on me, and probably, I don't know about Dave, but everybody who worked at the faculty, because of he worked, had connections to the faculty. Jean Ruddock was his partner, and Jean Ruddock was a professor, very influential professor at the faculty. And we're going back a long way now. If we look at this, 1978, Stenhouse was advocating for teacher research, and I'll come back to him. But he was a huge influence, and he still is. His ambitions and aims, in many ways, have still not been realized. But he placed school-university partnerships very firmly in this territory of knowledge creation, research, development of the teacher through knowledge creation. And I'll come back to say more about that. And then there were the people who are very famous names now, who were offshoots, if you like, built on what Stenhouse did. Many of them worked with him and went very much into the fields of action and practitioner research. Karen Kemmis in Australia now, John Elliott here, still working. Susan Groundwater-Smith in Australia, Bridget Somick and Helen Simons in this country. So here we have a purpose that actually these school-university partnerships are about the creation of knowledge, about practice and teaching and learning and schooling. I mean, John Elliott really emphasized the social justice function of this work. And then over here, we have coming out of, in the early days, coming out of America in many ways, this emphasis on collaboration and networks that, and I'm going back here to somebody whose work I admire a great deal, that's Judith Warren Little, who did research studies of teachers trying to bring about change in schools. How did they work? And she, again, was particular because she actually studied it. And what Judith Warren Little said is, it's difficult. She studies in particular secondary schools, and she had a lot to say about the usefulness of existing structures, using existing structures to do this work. And then I suppose very famously, the other writer about collaboration, although I have to say I'm dubious about whether he's ever researched it, is Andy Hargreaves, who wrote some, stellar pieces of thinking about collaboration and talked about different sorts of collaboration, collaboration that was positive, collaboration that was negative. And then in the United Kingdom, David Hargreaves took up many of these ideas. He actually crossed these boundaries here. He gave a very famous lecture in the 1990s where he talked about knowledge creation in schools. And this links to this idea that was around in the 90s. Donald in particular was very interested in this idea that there were different types of knowledge. So Gibbons talked about mode 2 knowledge, knowledge that was produced in combination with practice. And there were some very interesting influences on this debate. The Toyota, I think it was Toyota, I can't remember. The car company, anyway, the Japanese car companies were using techniques to produce cars where they were improving their cars by, in a sense, using a version of action research. They were engaging the workers in creating the knowledge about what was going wrong in the process. And this was very new. And it started to have an impact much more widely. And Gibbons, in many ways, wrote about this. And of course, if I jump back, the current, I guess, writer about that is Etienne Wenger, and this notion of communities of practice. So collaboration has grown from teachers, the idea has grown from teachers collaborating in a department to this notion that schools are in fact communities of practice, and that universities have a central role to play in that, or they can have, and that this combination, so that here we see, I'll come on to the last bottom two in a minute, at least two forms of purpose. That it's the creation of a community of practice, because in effect that makes institutional change more coherent. that would be Hargreaves, his latest ideas about joint practice development and effective leadership in schools are all around those ideas. So here we have collaboration very much as a tool for effective change almost, and satisfying development for teachers in schools. So the other purpose that's come in here, and I think it's strongest, I don't know, well, its origins are strongest in America, that this is a way of working which is a very powerful tool of professional development and system change. So we had Anne Lieberman talking about teacher leadership. Again, a new theme in there of democracy. So Lieberman and Miller talking very much about teacher leadership, and Cochrane Smith talking about the power of professional development through networks or school-university partnerships. So you can see that there are a lot of layers to this. And these aren't always in synergy. That's something we're going to talk about later, or I hope you'll be talking about. So those who were arguing for knowledge creation were arguing for asking challenging questions in many ways, creating new knowledge about practice. That's sometimes been in conflict with these two here, where we've had notions of best practice or teachers developing practice and just sharing it. These are very different views of research. Okay, so let me talk a bit. Oh, you see Dave Pedder features here. Let me talk a bit about the Cambridge family history, because this is an influence on all of us, and definitely on me. So at the top we had Lawrence Stenhouse and Jean Ruddock, who Lawrence Stenhouse was at the University of East Anglia, which is not far from here. And there were big connections between what was then the Institute of Education and UEA. There were joint degrees, for example, and so on. Jean Ruddock carried on. Lawrence died, and Jean carried on his tradition, and particularly is well known for the development of the student voice, what's called student voice, consulting students. And then we had directly, because John Eliot had worked with Lawrence Stenhouse on his very famous project, as had Dave Ebbett. And so they carried it on. And John Eliot and Dave Ebbett, well, particularly John Eliot, had a job at the Cambridge Institute. So he carried it on literally in the same, well, in a different location, but linked it very strongly to Cambridge. And so these ways of working became quite embedded in the Institute of Education, in its ways of working. Then there was a new breed of partnerships. The one that I was running with Donald, which was, as I've already mentioned, super. And David Frost and Dave Pedder were running similar partnerships with counties, with Hertfordshire and Essex. And one of the things that these partnerships did, I think with justification, because this is not just hard work to do, it's hard work to fit into a university. A university struggles sometimes to encapsulate this, although that's changed. Initial teacher education has school-university partnerships, but to try to calculate income, workload, all the nuts and bolts of university life through a partnership is extremely difficult. How do you get income to allocate the resources? One way of doing that which also is a way of building capacity and becomes a vehicle for working, is to run master's degrees, where the participants are from the schools or the local authority, and you can build you're building the next generation of teacher leaders in many ways. And at the faculty, this then became extended into initial teacher education. And so here we see the influences, or my version of the influences, on the Cambridge family. So let's go back to the beginning and talk about Stenhouse, if he was the seminal one. And I've quoted some of his very famous quotations here. He started off as somebody who was working on curriculum and became interested in change and development in curriculum and in teachers, and came to these conclusions. There can be no educational development without teacher development. I think he was absolutely spot on there. Policymakers write policy, and teachers and schools are extremely adept at seeing off the policy. Unless you engage with the teachers, unless you engage in teacher development, there can be no real change. Stenhouse also said that change happens by teachers systematically studying their practice and understanding what's happening in their classrooms, understanding the complexity of the classroom, understanding the processes. I have to say that continues to be my experience, that teachers undergo, I'll talk about it a bit more later, but they undergo a completely different perspective on the classroom. They adopt a different perspective. And particularly one of the things I think that happens through the data is they start to see the classroom through the eyes of the students. And of course, until you can do that, you can't really bring about real change in learning. So Stenhouse coined this phrase, which I don't know if it's used in your part of the world, but is definitely used here a lot, that research is systematic inquiry made public. Now, what he meant by made public is not written in an academic journal, but that there must be some community that interrogates the work that is being done. So there is a critical perspective. There are alternative perspectives on the data, on the findings. So he argued that that could be a small group of teachers in a school. It could be a master's group. It could be whoever it is. What is really crucial is the interrogation of the data, just as good researchers do. So he said that there were three essential elements: commitment to systematic questioning of one's own teaching, the commitment and skills to study one's teaching, and the concern to question and to test theory in practice. I still think in many ways those three, I guess they are purposes, have not been bettered. So here we see, if I try to summarize this section, different purposes, which of course are overlapping. And hopefully they're in sync with each other, and they can be brought to do that. But there are dangers here, and there are conflicts, as Dave said earlier, and there are tensions. Because knowledge creation is not quick. as you who are engaged in any form of research will know, it takes time, takes resource. And education is prone to fads and fashions about what's the latest thing that's going to really solve whatever the problem is. So sometimes there can be tensions between teachers' professional development, school improvement, and knowledge creation. But they can be in harmony as long as, and of course, when you're trying to introduce something like this, one of the problems you've got is that the people you may be trying to initiate something with don't fully see the implications of what they're doing. So they may be reluctant. They may want it to happen in a year. They may want to see much more impact immediately, and so on and so forth. So networking has definitely been supported now by research. Well, I would say collaboration probably rather than networking. So we do know that you have to create a culture within a school, within a partnership of mutual support and sharing of ideas. And that if you do that, you open up the possibility for teacher learning in a very powerful way. So networking, one of the things we'll come to later is as you scale up from the department to the school, to the network, to the cross schools, you increase the complexity and you increase the institutional demands, which are considerable in terms of creating the conditions in which this work can actually happen. But we do see different views even here of collaboration and networking. For some, school-university partnerships are about joint research work, and that can be really powerful. One of the most powerful projects we did was a 2-year project with the schools in the Super Network on pupil engagement. We chose one theme and we all worked on it. And that's a much simpler structure, if you like, than allowing each school or allowing topics to emerge, which you then have to coordinate. You can see the complexity. I think sharing of good practice sounds so straightforward, and it's a bit like, apple pie. It sounds like a good thing, but I don't think it is. I think it's much more complex than that. So let us now pause for a minute, and I hope somebody at your end is going to magically put you into breakout rooms.
Yes, they
and
will.
First, I'd like you to introduce yourselves to each other and think about your reflections on these purposes. And are there other purposes, do you think, that exist or could exist to build on what we've said so far? Right, enjoy your breakout, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. 10 minutes, actually, because I've got to reduce the time. 10 minutes. Okay, off you go. Ish. Soon.
Thank you. Farah, can you put us in groups now?
Yes, we just have to wait 10 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Farah.
No problem.
Farah, hi. Can you hear me, Farah? Hi, Dean.
Hey, is this the main group or the?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Oh, we are.
Yeah. Your the experiment didn't work, did it?
Yeah, it didn't work because it took me out. So I rejoined the main channel again.
Hello, everyone. So yeah, there's no escape from that. When you leave the breakout room, it kicks you out, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
I wonder if there's a way to fix it, like for me to learn for the future.
yeah, the most important, if you divide your students into groups, Farah, okay, you open all channels together, the video, and you can leave cancel each meeting, by which they will go back to the main group.
The manual, so do it manually. Yeah, I did it automatically on purpose. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the main chat though, because I've got the option to join a breakout room again. So it looks like we are actually back in the main chat. Yeah.
You are in the right place. Yeah.
So this is all being recorded, this discussion.
Yes.
Yeah, this is part of our learning process.
I know, yeah. Just reminding.
Thinking.
Where is the presenter?
So I will be communicating with her now from another account, and I will let her know that we are waiting here. She's still, they're still engaged in the.
It's in hold, RQ, and it's in hold. I don't know.
Oh, yes, good. We made it back into
I know, that's very scary, that.
Yeah, it is. Floating in a virtual vacuum.
So, Farah, are we ready to go again? No.
Yes, just one more group. They are so engaged in the conversation.
Okay.
Don't be shy in intervening, Farah.
I will.
That's an amazing background, Dave.
I know, it's just brilliant. I've got a window view onto the courtyard of the Ministry of Education complex. We cohabit with Ministry of Education policymakers. It's a wonderful physical situation. Yeah, we're in physical proximity with people of influence.
Lovely.
Yeah, very, very good indeed. Your background's good as well, isn't it? There's depth to your... Yeah, it's nice.
I didn't quite have time to tidy up those books on the couch, but there we are.
It's a nice touch, Colleen. I like it.
Okay.
Are we all here, Farah?
Yes, everybody's here now.
Okay, back to you, Colleen.
Thank you. I'm going to just hang on a second. Get my presentation up if I can. Ah, there we are. So, okay, it's just coming up. Okay. Okay, that was an interesting group I was part of. It was a very interesting discussion. And some of the key issues are really around, one, I think very important one is about this view of research and what we ascribe to research. And of course, we ascribe university research to be superior. And those associations play out in partnerships, and they play out in having to develop the confidence of practitioners and others in the type of research that's being done. I want to just say one thing. I think that is changing big time. So in the UK, the mode of inspection of university research has changed a great deal. And one of the things that now has to happen in a university is that you have to undertake an impact research case study, an impact case study of your research, rather. And that has increasingly been given more status and a greater percentage of the marks. So we are, I think, undergoing, I heard a talk from the chair of UNESCO the other day, where she was arguing what we need is more action research. And it's been a long time since I've heard a senior policymaker say that. But I do actually think that is changing. So I think the notion of research that crosses boundaries is a very, very important one. What I want to do now is take a more critical view through the research and through just thinking, if you like, of what we were talking about before. So we've talked about different purposes. One of the things we see is that mutual support and school improvement are pretty key shared purposes across most partnership working. So whether the degree to which that includes knowledge creation, I think varies. But let's take a look at some of the tensions and difficulties. So in knowledge creation, and this is in many ways what I was just talking about, or what you were talking about in your breakout rooms, is who's the audience? Is the audience the school, the classroom, the department, the public contribution? And it's not unsurprising that makes a difference in terms of what we do, how we do it, how we speak of it, the language we use. how we write about it. One of the things is that, and I mean, this is a real parody, but, you know, there has been a feeling that the more complex the way in which you write about it, the more obscure you make your ideas, the more clever you are, rather than simple communication being applauded. I mean, that's a real parody, but it is there are some truths in that. So how do we communicate what we're doing clearly? How do we make it accessible to people who haven't got time to read papers? These are all the big issues that we engage with once we get into this territory. There is a big issue, and I think probably the most powerful critique of teacher research is about its criticality. But this is not just a critique of teacher research. It's a critique of, in a sense, the utilitarian emphasis on research nowadays. You've got to show us what works, or you've got to come up with the magic bullet. And I think some of the obsession with randomized controlled trials comes around that, whereas sometimes the outcome might just be another set of very important questions. So criticality does matter. How do we play out the democracy here? One of the things when I was starting at the Institute was, and we would run courses where teachers would undertake pieces of research, which they would find very, very powerful. And then they get back to the school and discover they didn't have the power to act on what they'd found out. And this became potentially very dispiriting. So notions about the integration, autonomy into the research work and to the workings of the school are very, very important, because you might actually be making matters worse. The nature of the knowledge and the research, I think I've spoken about. And the other danger in a school, which is what in many ways Stenhouse was arguing about, is the notion of groupthink. How do we avoid groupthink? How do we get that element of criticality discussion going? The other key question is who participates with whom? Is it voluntary? Is it prescribed? I think it was Jennifer was talking in my group about how do you get the motivation going for this? And you don't get it by telling people they have to do it. Of that, I'm very clear. You have to think about the unit of operation and its feasibility. So starting with subject-based research in departments can be a very powerful start. And then it can get scaled up. The other issue we were talking about in our little group was the conditions for working, for joint working of teachers, never mind joint working of university colleagues with teachers. Does the school allow for this? Do the structures of the school allow for this? I would say this next point here, which is the same point of the enabling conditions, is probably the most important point here. If you cannot create the enabling conditions for the partnership, it will not last. I'm very, very clear about that. I've seen it too many times. And that can be a very demanding process. It, in many ways, requires imagination and creativity from head teachers. And let me give you an example. One of the most powerful things I've ever seen a head teacher do. As you well know, there are lots of meetings in schools. And often those meetings are about bureaucratic processes, information giving, so on and so forth. What this teacher did was say, we will not have any meetings other than those about teaching and learning. And those meetings will include small action research projects. And it transformed the purchase. It transformed the place of research in that school. And she moved all the other processes into other forms. Information was distributed either by digitally or on paper, and so on. And of course, we then discovered that actually those meetings were habitual rather than really being necessary. And of course, you then scale it up if you want this to be about school improvement. You have to, and I'll come to this later, you have to have the total commitment of the leadership of the school. It will not happen without that. So in Super, one of the things we realized after a while was you had to make it quite hard to join the partnership. If anybody could join, and not many demands were required at the beginning, people would collect it as a badge. Oh, I'm in a partnership with the University of Cambridge, or I'm in a partnership, whoever it's with. So we scaled it up. We scaled up the demands. We actually required schools to sign a partnership agreement. And so this is about making it clear what the demands are, securing commitment to those demands. Okay, so this, I'm going to give you the source of this. This work comes from a book we wrote, we being Donald McIntyre, myself, and Christine Black-Hawkins, called Networking Practitioner Research, where we did a complete review of existing research, but we also did a study of 7 or 8 existing networks, which were part of a project, a national project called Network Learning Communities, which was a very powerful project. And what did we learn from that? I want to share, that's what I want to share with you. So there is considerable advocacy of networks of collaborating practitioners. It's a phrase that trips off the tongue very easily. And existing research, and I'm particularly highlighting here recent studies led by Philippa Cordingley and colleagues, where she's done meta-analyses of the evidence for professional development. I mean, Dave Pedder's work here is also very important. And her research shows the powerful potential of collaboration. In fact, she would argue that it's essential if you're going to see real development in a school. But as I've said a few times already, the more you increase the scale, you increase the challenge. And that has to be managed. And I think starting small and growing the scale is a very important thing. The conditions, we're learning a lot. I'm not going to talk all the way through those, but we now know a lot about what the necessary conditions are for such partnerships, and that exists in much of the current research. There is a tendency to talk about collaboration as though it's an automatically a good thing. It's not a good thing, it is a good thing, but that it's unproblematic. And there's a woman who worked with Judith Warren Little called Achtenstein, who did studies of networks and cooperation and collaboration. And what she shows is you're going to have difference and you're going to have conflict. That is in many ways essential. You have to be prepared for that. You have to build the group so that it's able to withstand that. And it is, in fact, essential to have disagreement if you're going to have good outcomes. The research, particularly by Cordingley et al., and this is where this is in a sense an argument for school-university partnerships, is an external perspective on the school is essential. So it is a case for having skilled facilitation, often by university and other persons. So that external perspective is not an option. It's not something you can just give up when the network gets going. There are, in our group, people were talking about the tendency, and again, you know, there's really good writing about this, Lorty and so on, about teachers in many contexts are still used to working on their own, of closing the door and being the one who's in charge. To move towards collaboration can be emotionally very demanding. And I would say this, wouldn't I, because I'm interested in the emotions of teaching, but this work is emotionally demanding, and it requires facilitation that acknowledges that, and it requires facilitation that's able to deal with that. So I love this quote of Anne Lieberman's: networks dignify and give shape to the process and content of educators' experience, the dailiness of their work, which is often invisible to outsiders, yet binds insiders together. Now that's a wonderful quote, and in it are challenges as well as other implications. So one of the challenges is, do you know, if you're working in a school, what are the things that bind the insiders together? Because those things are often unspoken, they're often historical traditions or they're socio-cultural traditions, which you don't really appreciate the power of. And so uncovering what are the things, the dailiness, is very important. So the closeness to practice of the work is important, and the working context. It has to fit to the classroom. There has to be, for teachers, that recognition of the dailiness of their work, the recognition of that, and acknowledgement of that. And there are different purposes of network activities, and we need to think that through very clearly rather than get caught up in the collaboration with anybody is a good thing. We need to think very clearly about the implications of what we're doing. Excuse me. So again, this is an area of huge advocacy, that networking between schools increasingly recognized as the key driver of school improvement. That's a quote from David Hargreaves. Well, I want to be a bit more skeptical about that. I don't want to argue against it, but it's not as simple as that. We do need, it does make huge demands on resource and time and skill. The pooling of resources in a network can be very, very helpful, but that's difficult. That's very difficult for schools to share resources. We do know that it must have external help and facilitation, but also there needs to be an organizational hub for the network. There needs to be somebody, and I used to struggle with it in Super, because I felt I wasn't being democratic as the facilitator of the network. I would often make decisions and I think, well, I didn't really talk to anybody about that or whatever. Am I being anti-democratic? But actually, it's really needed that there is somebody or a group of people who have the time and expertise to drive the network. because otherwise it sort of solidifies. And there has to be somewhere in the network the provision of research expertise and the development of ways of sharing the research. This is very difficult. It's much better now. I've become a great fan of the video. I think videos are very, very powerful ways of sharing, and I think COVID has helped us to do that. But the challenges of networks are their messiness and the coherence of the network with planning. Schools are very different from each other. The focus of the research and the time limitedness of it. So the other aspect which we talked about is knowledge creation. And in our view, that was the least achieved because it's the hardest. And to do that requires radical change and an aspirational policy. And this is taking us back into the territory where we started at the beginning of this slot, the modes of knowledge production. What sort of research? What can we act upon in terms of research? How are we going to address those issues? Okay, so I've raised some thorny questions, which is what I was trying to do there. These are the objects for discussion. Let me talk now about what I think I've learned are the imperatives. What do you have to have? Well, some of these, you know, have become clear in what I'm saying. I'm going to start here. You do need a vision and values. What is this activity, whether it's, sorry about this. What is this activity? What is it about? What are we trying to do? Do we have, and the word I haven't put in there, is a shared vision? Or is this the vision of one party? So creating that shared vision and values, I'm going to talk about one of the networks I'm running at the moment. And I think we've spent more time on that almost than anything else. External facilitation and capacity building, the building of teacher leadership, research expertise, facilitation of interactions, skilled facilitation of interactions, where there is acknowledgement of emotion and other aspects, understanding of schools and classrooms. You have to have appropriate partners. Not all universities can do this work, actually. Not everybody in a university can do this work. It's very different. It's very complex. You need within the network clear leadership roles and the capacity for leadership. And I've learned that one of the things as an external facilitator I often have to do is argue for resources, put pressure on leadership, be it in an area or in a school, to provide the work, the resources to do the work. The development of a culture, what people call a research culture, is very, very important. And we'll talk a bit about how you build that. It grows because what you see happening is that teachers start to talk about what they're doing. And that's the most important thing. Then you start to see, for example, one school I worked in one of the super schools had a research corner. Schools, I'm going to talk about one of the networks working within Kazakhstan, has set up a space, which is the network space, which is the research space. That's a sign that there's a research culture building. I think this one is obvious. You've got to plan for the research and the networking. It has to be very conscious planning. And you need the resources and opportunities. And I'm going to try and illustrate that, what that means. I'm going to talk through these two networks. These are real live things. The there was the super course. I'm going to talk through the structures we set up and how they worked. So super began, not interesting, it began as a research project where Donald McIntyre, was his idea, applied for a research grant to study research, a research network, a school-university partnership. He was a great advocate of school-university partnerships, but he'd never been engaged in one that was around educational research. As it evolved in the university, we had a coordinator, not full-time, but significant amount of time, 4 lecturers also engaged, and we ran a master's course. And in the end, that's how we secured our resource. We secured it by running a master's course. The university recognized that as a feature and said, oh, okay, you've got a master's course. So that's why you've got these people working. That's where it comes from. That's where the resource comes from. Universities are not built easily nor are schools, for partnership working. We did our capacity building, as I've said, through the master's course. We had particular roles here in the schools. We had the head teacher was an essential, it was non-negotiable that the head teacher had to be a member of meetings, had to attend meetings once a month, once every 6 weeks, that each school had to have a teacher research coordinator and a student voice coordinator. And these people ran the research in the school. These people attended the master's course, and that was a requirement. And the head teacher had to pay, which was not inconsiderable amount of money, the fees for 2 teachers to attend the master's course. This was an easy fit model, really. And I'm sure Dave can share with us in a minute the structures in his own. We had network meetings. We had individual research themes, but increasingly we moved to a common research theme. The second network is one I'm engaged in now, and it's far more challenging. Very different from the super network. It's called SHARE, School Hubs for Action, Research and Education. It's in a city in Kazakhstan, the Akimat, which is the mayoralty in English understandings. So the mayor asked us to set up networks, and the original idea is to increase that participation of the schools. It's a way of improving the quality of education in the capital city. No tradition of practitioner research, big problem, because not a long-lasting problem though, I have to say. So one of the key features here is, what is the cultural understanding and tradition of research? Well, in a post-Soviet state, it's a very different understanding from some of the notions in the UK and the US of practitioner applied research. That really did not exist. What we did was take on 3 groups, we're now in the 3rd year, of 5 to 8 schools, built that group as a network, and then we increasingly trying to build the network across. Then there was a center in the Akimat, which we have developed as a leadership hub coordination. That is becoming more and more absolutely central. External facilitation and capacity building from us. And then after we've been going about 4 months, COVID hit. So I haven't been to Kazakhstan for 2 years. We've had to work online. It's been an extraordinary challenge. But like many challenges, it's forced us to do things that I think have become very helpful. It forced us to think about the development of the local capacity, rather than just falling back on, oh, we'll go out there, we'll run workshops, blah, blah, blah. So we have really developed this role. And in the first group, there were 5 school coordinators, 1 from each school, who we have now worked hard to develop their capacity, and they are becoming network coordinators. In light of what I've already said, you won't be surprised to hear that the least developed aspect is the networking between schools. Okay, I'm going to actually stop there. I had set up, but maybe we could stay in this format. I don't know. Dave, I'd welcome your advice here, because do you want me to stop in 10 minutes?
I think it would be, yes, because colleagues' timetables are structured around a 2 o'clock finish.
Exactly.
And it might be really great to have a plenary discussion now. What do you think, Colleen? I
think that's right. So I'll just leave this slide up just for a second so you can read it.
Yes, yes.
And then I will. I'll leave you, Dave, actually, to lead. No surprise here, for you to lead the plenary, if you don't mind. Okay. And in my slide right at the end, I put some key research writing. How do I stop? Oh, there we go. There we go, Dave. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Colleen.
So the questions basically were, what do you think are the most crucial aspects of successful networks? What do you consider to be the dangers and threats? And how would you like to develop it if you did?
Yes, so colleagues, we've just encountered a raft, a really rich vein of thinking around partnerships, and I hope it's provided opportunities for us to think about partnership work that we're already involved in or which we're planning. So let's open the floor now to everybody here, either to make a comment, raise a query, ask a question of clarification, or make a statement, you know, a statement reflecting your perspective in relation to partnership. So let's just take a moment of quiet and then contribute and share ideas. Joseph, go ahead.
Okay. Professor Colleen, we've been in some partnership, developing some partnership recently. And in one of our discussions, I raised some issues about insider, outsider, in-between positioning in partnership. So are there conditions where, or situation in partnership when a member of the partnership could be an insider, outsider, or in between positioning, or the school level can a partner from the school become an insider and outsider at a certain point in time? And how do we negotiate this territory during that particular positioning?
It's a third space question. You're muted, Colleen, sorry.
Interesting question. I think it is about leadership. So it's about thinking through the leadership in the network or the partnership. And so in Kazakhstan, for example, our network coordinators, as we now call them, who started off as school coordinators, and the same was true in Super, the people who were the coordinators in their schools developed the skills of leadership. And then if you work with them quite consciously to develop their skills of leadership, you have those in-between people. And they speak with a voice that's very credible, actually. But you have to give them authority and you have to give them status, because you've also got the other side of the coin where teachers will say, why should I listen to that teacher who's younger than me? What do they know? So I think you do have those positions. You have to consciously plan it. You have to build the capacity. I don't know if I've answered your question, Joseph, but I've tried.
Yes, my question is answered. Thank you very much. That at certain point, what I'm understanding from your answer is that at a certain point in time, there are those who are insider who know more of the situation at hand, so they should be given authority to speak, to voice instead of colonizing their voices.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely.
Good. Thank you.
Over to you, Tasneem. Have you just taken your hand down, or is your hand still up?
My hand is still up, and I have a quick question. Thank you, Professor Colleen, for your wonderful presentation. And we have been lately working on some very interesting partnership research projects. A few are on site, and one of the things that Farah and myself are exploring is conducting a systematic review about developing research-informed practices or research-based school-university partnerships, and majority we find is about teacher practicum-oriented partnerships for teacher education in the literature. So we wanted to conduct a study and see what's there. But my question to you is, sustaining.
Sorry, before you move on,
yes.
That is a really important activity.
Thank you.
Don't just say, I'm going to stop there. Most of the development of thinking has gone on because people who are actually doing it have researched it, taken it seriously, and had dialogues with other people doing it. So don't undervalue that's very important.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So my question centers on sustaining these partnerships. So sustaining partnerships is really crucial. And I'm really proud to share that our school partner, BZAC, here in Abu Dhabi, the leader, is here with us in this session. And his idea is not just, for their school to grow. I mean, their leadership team wants to expand it, disseminate it with other schools in Abu Dhabi. So in order for that to happen, is it advisable not just one-to-one school-university partnership, but a few schools with one university as a networked, collaboration, a community of practice kind of partnership? Is that advisable? Is that manageable? And is that sustainable? I'm sorry, I think there are too many questions into it.
No. That's I understand that. And one of the most threatening things can be success. Because when you have a model that works with one school and you have the resources and the capacities to do that, the minute you scale up, you have to have different capacities, different resources, and you have to think that through. So I think it makes sense to scale up if that's what you want to do. But you must know that you're increasing the complexity and the demand. And you have to think through how you're going to cope with that.
Thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you, Tasneem. Farah, over to you.
Hello, Farah.
Hello, that's me. Hello, and thank you so much, Professor Colleen, for this presentation. We've been waiting for it. Yes. So I personally, as a researcher, I've been involved in school-university partnership research very recently. So I started with experimental, some large-scale studies. I do have some researcher friends who always challenge me, and they always criticize action research, that can we really generalize findings from action research? And I think this is a common, I'm sure you've heard this before so many times. So I want to continue this conversation with my friend later on. So what can you guide me, okay? Because I know that this is not true. Action research in schools can lead to generalized findings. If we were,
no, I think it is painful to hear this as a researcher in a university. I've had it all my life that in some way you're seen as inferior, and you have to live with that. Yeah, I don't know whatever ways you cope with those sorts of stresses, but you have to accept that is going to come. I think there are some very good writings I would send you to. One is Helen Simon's The Case of the Singular, where she writes about the importance of a single case study. But it's quite simple, I think. Research has to be fit for purpose. And that idea of fit for purpose for me is really, really important. If you want to understand the complexities of the classroom, then you have to study the classroom. You cannot do that by using certain methods. You can do that by action research. You can do that by case studies. If you do not address the complexity of the transfer of an idea into practice, if you don't acknowledge how absolutely difficult that is, then you will not have successful policy. It's as simple as that. It's the missing link in the policy. The implementation of policy is action research.
I wish we had, I wrote this in the chat, I wish we have an organization, like the What Works Clearinghouse, where only experimental, large-scale studies are recognized to identify evidence-based practices. If only we had an organization that synthesizes action research, Professor Colleen. Yes, so if Professor David, do you think does anyone else have any questions? Because I did have one more question. I'm not sure if I have time for it.
We do have time, and those who are interested are very welcome to stay, of course. Those who have other pressing engagements, please feel free to leave or make any comments in the margin. Do go ahead, Farah. This is a very interesting line of thought.
Only two points, Professor Colleen. The first one is related to the project that Tasneem already introduced to you today, the systematic review on school-university research partnerships. So when we started engaging in this literature review, right, we are reviewing the literature, I found a challenge with terminology. Okay, so when we're using our key terms or our search terms, and I'm using partnership, we noticed that we should also include networks and we should also include collaboration. So, but there is a difference, because not all collaborations are true partnerships and not all networks are partnerships.
So it's about your audience.
Yes.
And your definition. And I think it's about something else, I think what we're talking about, Farah, is coming to have your own understanding of what you're doing and be able to articulate that with confidence. And that grows. That doesn't come immediately. I mean, I've been doing this a rather long time. So, it takes a long time to get that inside you and be able to share it with confidence. But writing about it is one way to do that. Absolutely it is.
Thank you so much. And the last, okay. So in school-university research partnerships, so the university and the school, okay, have a shared interest, a shared purpose, shared vision, as you mentioned. So we are, and the university, we are interested in practice-based research, and the school is interested in research-based practice, right? But how do we find each other? How do we find each other? I've been having a challenge with this, you know, because we are so lucky. Nigel, I'm so glad you are here. I'm delighted. We have BSAC as our great partnership. But how do you find these schools? Because you know, sometimes by coincidence.
What's the title of that film? Build the Field and They Will Come. And start, I mean, I do actually think it's a human process. Yes. I actually think it's about people you meet who you have a shared passion, you have a shared interest, and you start there. So all of these partnerships I've been describing started with one contact between two people. You know, the work I'm doing in Kazakhstan happens to come from a doctoral student who desperately wanted to introduce these ideas. And she became somebody who had the power to do that. And so we work together. And that's how it starts. So yeah. I don't think there is a magic bullet. I think partnerships that I've seen that are, we're going to have a partnership and it's going to change everything, have not worked. Actually. So start, it's organic, grow it. You know, so in Kazakhstan, a classic example, we've got this, we've only been doing this with 10 schools now for 2 years. And we did a presentation at a conference. Well, suddenly everybody wants to do this. And that's a danger, because suddenly you've only got your own resources and you've got to scale up. And that's a real challenge. And you're risking, you know, a lot when you do that. Thank you, Dean. Field of Dreams.
Thank you so much.
Can't hear you, Dave.
Thank you, Farah, for those questions. Really interesting line of inquiry. Nigel, over to you. Nigel, Nigel is a really important figure in our partnership with BSAC. Over to you, Nigel.
Thanks, David. Colleen, thank you so much. It is absolutely fascinating listening to you. I feel honoured to be here. So I'm the Deputy Head Teacher at the British School Al Khabairat, or BSAC as we are known, and we have the University School Partnership with the ECAE, and we're very proud of that, and we feel very fortunate with that, to be in that. I think you're right. Kevin Costner, Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. And that's definitely where we are right now, I feel. And I totally agree that the relationship and the partnerships are built on human relationships and having a shared vision and a shared passion for that. And I know that myself and our head teacher share the passion that Professor Pedder and the colleagues there at ECA have. My question for you is, I think you've sort of touched upon it just in that last question from Farah there, but there is tensions, potential tensions in university and school partnerships in around lots of different things. The complexity of research, the fact that teachers are not experts in that field, and that the complexity of the language that is used by universities, and the level of thinking which goes beyond the day-to-day chalk-face thinking that teachers do and are skilled at doing. So it develops this asymmetric power relationship with or potentially can. And yes. I'm very, very grateful to colleagues at the Emirates College of Advanced Education, because they really work incredibly hard with us as a school to break that down. But the key element for the partnership in terms of a school's point of view, and certainly in terms of a teacher's point of view, because we want teachers to buy into the culture of research developed practice, is what is in it for me. That is the bottom line. They work incredibly hard very long hours and put heart and soul into what is a vocation, not just a job, and to rip them apart, rip them away from spending hours on planning, assessing, and working with students. They have to feel that there is something in it for them. So it's almost like low-hanging fruit, or things that we can pluck that we really will make a difference for staff. And from your knowledge and expertise and experience in this, what sort of a piece of advice could you give to us as a whole partnership in terms of for overworked staff, what sort of areas really help in that respect?
Well, I think what you're raising is absolutely crucial. If the partnership does not answer that question for the teacher, that there is something in this for me, it won't last. It'll last a couple of years and it'll wither and die. And so I guess it's up to both parties to make the adaptations that are necessary, and time is the biggest one. I mean, I was serious about what I said about meetings. So it sounds so obvious, but if there isn't time to meet and talk about the work, well, if you can't make that time as part of the time allocation of the school, then you're punishing the teachers, in fact. You're making them do extra time. So, and some of these, I'm sure it doesn't apply in your context, but some of these can be really profound. So in Kazakhstan, you are paid by the teaching hour. You're paid by the face-to-face hour. So you're not paid to meet and talk. You're not paid. So they do it. I don't know how they do it, but they do. They meet on Saturday mornings, and but you can't sustain that. So question for school leaders: what can we stop doing? That head teacher who changed the nature of meetings. How do we give our teachers the necessary resources? And the biggest resource is time and people. Those are crucial. And then the third thing is, and this is for whoever the leader is in a sense, how to make this real for the teachers, that it is addressing something that matter. Sorry, I don't know who this person is, but they're very persistent. So let me give you an example from the SHARE project. We found that we had to start small. And you may not continue small, but you start small. So we started with the classic activity of studying a child you have concerns about. And let's see what you can learn by doing some observations, by talking to the child, simple activities. And for many teachers who had never experienced research before, that was transformative. Oh, I get this now. I've learned all these things about this child in this classroom and my teaching that weren't my preconceptions. So we started very small and then have built it from there. And one of the dangers is that people want to go too far too fast. And yeah, that's it really. I think that's all I have to say on that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question, Nigel. And I think one of the features, I hesitate to use the word method in relation to partnership, because I agree, Colleen, you know, it's all about relationship building. There's no science of partnership. You don't kind of publicize yourself and wait for potential partner schools to come. It's about cultivating a partnership discourse in your existing networks and seeing where they lead. I mean, and I learned that from Super, and I learned that from you, you know, and the way you think and the way you learn. So, and the way you think about partnerships. Just one thing about a sustainable focus for partnership, and what we're trying to do, Nigel, as you and I work together in our partnership, is to develop this sense, isn't it, of research as an embedded feature of professional development and practice development. This is a perspective that you yourself have developed and cultivated at BZAC and contributed to the conversations that you and I have. And it's absolutely fabulous, because it from my point of view, it means that you're not seeing the partnership, you're not seeing research as some kind of add-on extra to the routines of professional work of teachers and so on. And we're locating our research very explicitly within an agenda of school improvement that you're articulating to us. So there's a kind of response mode there. But I think you're right to talk about tensions, Nigel, because I think there are tensions, and I think the tensions are really constructive. And one of the tensions is, and we really are trying very, very hard to break this down, but the asymmetry between university and school teams, where somehow the university team has a monopoly of research expertise. And that's not the model of partnership or partnership research that I think is valid or useful. Big emphasis on useful, and your point, Nigel, so that the research is practically useful for the teachers, that they have an obvious in-your-face take-home from the research. And it's so important. And to do that, it's no good us as your partners talking in university gobbledygook that has no meaning for the practice world of teachers. And so when Joseph earlier asked his question about insiders, outsiders, and in-betweeners, the assumption there is that, oh, well, somehow, you know, we're insiders in the university world and you're an insider in the school world. But I can tell you, and Colleen can tell you, the university world itself, in any single institution and any faculty within the institution, is, thank God, a highly contested world, where argument is always just around the corner. Long may that continue. But there's nothing automatic about partnership as an accepted way of behaving among university people. There are those who say, well, that's not our job. You know, our job is to do blue skies thinking and write high-minded publications. And I'm fairly sure, but please correct me if I'm wrong, Nigel, in the school world, there'll be a whole load of colleagues at BZAC who don't care a thing about a partnership with an organisation like ECAE. So you yourself are engaged in fighting a corner. So who is an insider and who is an outsider and who is an in-betweener? Like, really, it's really difficult to know what that is. So we can only help you with your agenda in your contested world by making sure that the research we do and plan together is really practically useful. And that is a criteria that Donald McIntyre used. And it speaks to Farah's question, you know, where practically useful research is often small scale, ingrained in context, in complexity. Yeah. Who cares whether it can be generalized through probability theory? What counts is, can it be shared through networks? It's an entirely different dynamic of wider relevance. I mean, just get rid of words like generalization, use words like networking and wider relevance to assert the potency of our research. Sorry, that was longer than expected.
No, that's all right, Dave. I think I would just add one thing, which is build on the connections that already exist. So I do think we underplay the subject links, for example, in secondary schools.
Yes.
And that can be a natural connection between schools. And I notice in the latest research that people are doing on professional development, they're arguing very strongly for the subject specialism as well. Now, I'm not that sort of person, but it doesn't mean I can't acknowledge that might be a very, very important thing. So that's it. That was my point.
Yes, for secondary schools, yes. Okay, if I may, I'd just like to, there are no more questions from the floor. I'd like to close the session with some closing remarks. Colleen, thank you so much for joining with us.
Late, I'm sorry.
Sorry?
I apologize about being late.
Yes, Colleen. The thanks is ours. We're so grateful to you, Colleen. You've got a wealth of experience, and what I feel over the last couple of hours is not only there's a bond of partnership thinking, not that we agree about everything, but we share a passion and a commitment to partnership work as a mode, a very explicit mode of educational development. And that's a mode of educational development that we take very seriously at ECAE in our different ways, from our different perspectives. And so all of us here are so grateful to you for sharing your experience and your know-how. So that's one of the bonds, is the commitment to partnership work. The other bond is this absolute truth, isn't it? That when you work with somebody for a number of years, and you've worked with people for much longer than you've worked for me. I mean, I knew you and worked with you for about 12 years, I think. It's a delight to me to feel the continuation of that bond of colleagueship born out of shared commitments, shared values in that respect. It's a professional joy to me to welcome your involvement in the ECAE community. It's been a wonderful morning. You have provided us with such food for thought. We're going to be thinking and reflecting on your presentation over the coming weeks and months, and your thoughts will influence the way we develop our partnership thinking. And for that, we're very, very grateful, Colleen. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you, Dave. I echo what you're saying. I mean, it's been a joy for me, and I'd be very happy to join in any future dialogues you may want down the line.
We'd love you too, and we'd see you in an advisory role, in a consultancy role, and I know you would invest that kind of role with a huge democratic, voice-empowering ethos. So thank you very much, Colleen. We will be in touch. And with those remarks, I close the session. Thank you, colleagues, for your participation, and enjoy the rest of your days. Goodbye. Thank you, Colleen.